Last year, I purchased Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 at full price, mostly because I had just started this YouTube channel and wanted to review a big ticket game to get things started. Sadly, it turned out to be one of the worst video game purchases I had ever made. The campaign was terrible, the multiplayer mode launched with only a collection of remastered maps, and the Zombies mode was a reskin of the free game mode DMZ. This year, I was thankful to Microsoft for including Black Ops 6 in the Game Pass catalog on day 1 because I thought even if it ended up being terrible, at least I was not spending any extra money. Surprisingly, Black Ops 6 turned out to be one of the best Call of Duty games I have played in recent times. The campaign was full of twists and turns. The multiplayer mode launched with more than a dozen all new maps, and the zombie mode, well, it did a U turn and went back to a round based format, which is what a lot of fans wanted. So, at least at launch, this is a really competent first person shooter that is actually worth paying full price for. And if you are an Xbox Game Pass Ultimate or PC Game Pass subscriber, there's really no reason to not give this game a try since it is already included in your subscription. Similar to last year's Call of Duty review, this video is split into three main sections, covering each of the major parts of the game: the campaign, multiplayer, and zombies. The gameplay part will anyway be talked about in each of the sections, but since I usually talk about other aspects of the games in my reviews like the visuals, sound, and music, let me mention those aspects right now. In general, the technical aspects of Call of Duty games have never been bad, and it's no different for Black Ops 6. I only have one minor issue to highlight, and it's more of a suspicion rather than a complaint, and it is that the visuals seem to be held back due to the game being available on PS4 and Xbox One. The game no doubt looks quite good, but Call of Duty is the biggest AAA franchise of the year, and it is not unfair to ask for a visual upgrade at least every 2 to 3 years. Right now, the game looks quite similar to Black Ops Cold War, which came out in 2020. Activision is happy to continue selling the game on old consoles because it is guaranteed to sell well on those platforms, but I wonder just how much the game is being held back due to the requirement that it has to run equally well on the old platforms. We are now more than halfway into the life cycle of the current generation of consoles, and it is really strange to see games being released for the previous generation even now. Anyway, that was just a minor issue to point out. Otherwise, the game still looks fantastic, especially in the cinematic set pieces during the campaign. The sound and music are top notch as well. The music really amps up the adrenaline rush felt during some campaign missions, and I found it quite delightful. As for performance, I played on my Series X and faced no glitches whatsoever. The game ran at a smooth 60 FPS the entire time, and there were no crashes at any time. That about wraps it up for the technical aspects. Let us now dive deeper into each section of the game. The campaign part will contain a few spoilers, although I won't be showing anything beyond the first 4 missions of the game. Let's begin.
Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate.
Call of Duty first got famous as a franchise for its gritty war-themed campaigns. Gradually, the audience's appeal moved over to multiplayer, and these days, it is common for players to treat the campaign as a secondary part of the game, meant to be played once and forgotten. Most of the live streams that took place for Black Ops 6 at launch continued the trend of focusing entirely on multiplayer first in a race to unlock different kinds of useless checklists. But very few people predicted that the campaign would end up being the most unique part of Black Ops 6. The campaign is actually so good that I would recommend this game to be purchased at full price just to play this one part of the game. Think of multiplayer and zombies as a bonus for your purchase. That's because Raven Software, the support studio that primarily handled the development of the campaign for Black Ops 6, has delivered a unique Call of Duty experience that mimics the famous campaign of Titanfall 2, where every level tried to offer a different gameplay mechanic or story experience. For the most part, Black Ops 6 succeeds at that. The campaign has 11 main missions and a few filler missions in between where you go around your safe house. The 11 main missions try their very best to offer something new every time. For instance, the first mission starts out in typical Call of Duty fashion with a linear path full of action. But then, the very next mission takes on a stealth approach that rewards you for sneaking around without getting detected. The third mission continues this stealth approach, and just when you start getting a bit annoyed, the fourth mission suddenly drops you into a Ubisoft styled open world map with a huge list of side objectives and markers. I won't spoil what happens beyond this point, but the surprises don't end there. Seen individually, the levels may not offer anything totally new, but when put together, this is a group of levels that deliver a very gripping spy thriller story that always makes you eager to see what surprise the next level has to offer. As a result, even though the number of missions is smaller compared to last year's game, this campaign is actually quite longer, depending on how much time you choose to spend in the open world sections and how much stealth you choose to use. Speaking of the open world missions, there's only one true open world map, and the other is kind of a choose your own path kind of mission set in a smaller map. But both of them offer a drastically improved experience compared to last year's open combat missions, which were completely boring. So, what changed? Why is this campaign so much better than last year's poorly received game? The answer lies in the development time. Last year's game was reportedly completed in around 1.5 years, while Black Ops 6 spent around 4 years in development. It is not clear how much of those 4 years was spent specifically for the campaign, but the information we have is that Raven Software handled the campaign and Treyarch handled multiplayer and zombies. So it's a fair assumption that all 4 years was spent in designing and then fine tuning the campaign. The result speaks for itself. If this can somehow convince Activision to scrap its annual release schedule, at least for the campaigns, we may actually see more of these well made stories in the future. Okay, I realized I said a lot of stuff without actually talking about the story, so let's fix that. The game is set in 1991 and you play as a silent CIA agent named William Case Calderon. Since your character is not customizable, I'm not sure why they didn't go with a fully voiced protagonist. There's all the usual awkward moments of having a silent protagonist, such as picking up a phone and not saying anything while the other person magically knows what's going on. Anyway, your team gets suspended for some random reason, but you stealthily continue your mission, which is to take down a rogue paramilitary group known as Pantheon, who are playing with a bioweapon called the Cradle, which turns anyone who comes in contact with it into an aggressive zombie. You set up a safe house in a place called the Rook and work with an assortment of team members, all of whom have their own agenda. Over the course of the campaign, you get to play as each of the main team members, and it keeps things interesting. Since this is a spy thriller, you can expect the usual double agent surprises, a lot of sneaking around, and some drug induced hallucinations. How you deal with Pantheon and save the world from being impacted by the Cradle makes up the rest of the story. The trailers made a huge fuss about mentioning Bill Clinton and Saddam Hussein, but they are not really part of the story in any meaningful way. In fact, that's one of the few criticisms I have seen about the campaign. It is that the main villain doesn't really make a huge impact. If you were hoping to fight against Saddam Hussein in the final chapter, you're going to be severely disappointed. Between the main missions, you get to take some time off and talk to your team members in the Rook, your safe house. You can learn more about your teammates' motives and sometimes get a bit more context about your missions, but all of that is optional. You can also upgrade your safe house, which gives you access to some perks that can make you stronger in the main missions. This is kind of optional depending on which difficulty setting you choose to play, but it's a nice inclusion that adds more depth to the gameplay. The ending felt a bit weak, mostly because it did not fully resolve the story and once again tried to set things up for a further date. If only for once they had wrapped things up neatly without a tease for the future, this would have been the best Call of Duty campaign in recent times. It still feels like it though, and it is definitely the best one released in this decade. The question now is, How long has next year's campaign been in development? And after the mostly positive reception that this campaign has received, will Activision or even Microsoft decide to scrap the annual schedule and allow each new game to take as long as needed to hit this quality bar? That remains to be seen. For now, Microsoft will be happy that the first Call of Duty game that they released day one on Xbox Game Pass is off to a great start and will likely bring in a lot of new subscriptions. The multiplayer section is the live service part of the game that gets frequent updates, so whatever I talk about today might be completely irrelevant a few months later. There will be new modes, new maps, and other changes to this part of the game. What will remain constant is the emphasis on progression. The multiplayer section is primarily where you get to show off all your achievements by equipping calling cards, emblems, and weapon skins. It's also where you can show off your flashy character skins from the shop. As an older gamer, I fondly remember the days when playing multiplayer used to be all about testing your skills against other players across the world, or simply to go in and have fun without worrying about goals or progression. Today it is all about grinding to tick off multiple checklists so that you can unlock some shiny new thing to show off. Let me talk about the actual gameplay for a bit. At launch, there are just over a dozen new maps to play on, with more expected throughout the year as the seasonal model kicks in. The new maps seem to be receiving a mixed reception from the community, and it is here that I can sympathize with the map designers a little. After 20 years, designing a new multiplayer map for a Call of Duty game means it will immediately be compared with some of the best maps in the franchise's long history, and players will either immediately hate it or complain that it is not as good as the old maps. This is not helped by the fact that a lot of the new maps that are introduced throughout the year are usually remakes or remasters of older maps, which doesn't give the new maps a chance to prove their worth. Personally, I don't play competitive PvP, so map design is never really an issue for me. I enjoy looking at the visuals for one or two matches, and after that, all the maps seem kind of the same, except for those with some sort of gimmicks like having a football stadium in the background or having a lot of water which you have to constantly keep in mind. The rest of the time, I play the game quite casually, usually with a podcast running in the background, and that has made it really easy for me to enjoy the experience without being too bothered about spawn points or anything like that. Now let's look at the game modes on offer. The playlist filter currently has 9 core modes to choose from and also a few hardcore modes. All of them are modes we have seen in past Call of Duty games. The old Bounty game mode got renamed to Kill Order, and a lot of news outlets can't stop promoting it as some brand new game mode. It is still the same concept where one player from each team is designated as a high value target and everyone else tries to hunt them down. The only major change is that the HVT now has body armor. It's definitely a neat idea, but it is still an old game mode from a couple of years ago. Similar to the maps, I understand that coming up with new game modes for a shooter game is incredibly difficult, especially when a lot of people just ignore the objectives and turn every game into team deathmatch. It's a tough problem to solve after coming up with new game modes for 20 years. However, that's what the designers are paid for, so let's sit back and see what they come up with this year. To sum up this section, unlike the campaign, there is no major changes here, so you will essentially be doing the same things you did last year, but on a new set of maps that you will either like or hate. We don't know yet if Treyarch have planned any major changes in the seasonal model, but for now, the game seems set up to follow exactly the same model as last year, where we get a few new maps and one or two new game modes each season, along with a whole lot of new skins to purchase in the shop. Last but not the least, there's the Zombies mode. I always find it interesting how a military shooter series like Call of Duty gradually embraced something weird like zombies to be part of its core offering. With a few exceptions, nearly every annual installment has offered its own variation of the Zombies mode, but Black Ops 6 probably does the least in terms of trying to innovate on the formula. Even the marketing copy only says that this game marks the return of round based zombies. There's nothing new being offered, it's only the return of something old. For hardcore fans, though, that's probably all they need for now after staying away from the round based system for 2 years. But in a few months, they may realize that there is little new on offer beyond new maps. Like I said in last year's review, I am not too heavily invested in this game mode, so I am not the best person to review it. But as a tourist, I decided to spend a little more time this year on this mode to see what the fuss about round based zombies was all about. Unlike last year, I decided to queue up with randoms this time in order to get the full squad experience. There are two maps available in the game mode at launch, Liberty Falls and Terminus. I played one match on each of the maps and lasted for roughly 15 rounds thanks to a hard carry by my teammates. I was ready to extract after round 10, but I guess that was too soon because none of my teammates would accompany me and you need at least two people to extract. In case you're unfamiliar with the game mode like me, the basic rules are kill zombies, collect rewards, and stay alive for as long as possible. There's a few gameplay mechanics to worry about as well, but the basic goal is to survive for as long as possible. It's a formula that's been perfected over several years, and what this game does is to bring back that formula without really making any major changes, apart from the maps, of course. The Zombies mode has its own set of challenges and unlocks, but apart from that, it is pretty much a PvE game mode that you may want to play whenever you're bored of playing PvP. It remains to be seen if there will be any major content updates beyond the maps over the game's lifespan.
The agency is compromised.
If you're a Game Pass subscriber, it is very easy to recommend Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and chances are you're going to try it regardless of anyone's review. The offering of campaign, multiplayer, and zombies is a familiar enough package to keep old players interested and also varied enough to welcome new players. I highly recommend that you install and play the campaign at least once, especially if you're someone who routinely skips the campaigns each year. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 is now available on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation across the old and new generation of consoles. Thanks for watching.